Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on sharing data with the National Addiction and HIV Data Archive Program, meeting the requirements of the new NIH data sharing policy. We are excited to talk to you today about, first of all, what NAHDAP is, and how researchers who are looking to archive their data, especially in light of the new NIH data management and sharing policy, can use NAHDAP's resources to meet those requirements. Before we get too far into today's presentation, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you so that we can get an idea of who is here today and what experiences you have around data sharing and archiving. So I'm going to share a couple of poll questions with you within Zoom. You will see them on your screen momentarily. Please take a moment to respond to those. I hope that you see them now. Please go ahead and respond. And while you are doing that, I'm going to start by introducing today's speakers. So first of all, my name is Chelsea Samples-Steele. I am a senior data project manager working on NAHDAP. NAHDAP is a part of ICPSR at the University of Michigan. We will get into that a little bit more later. I work with researchers who are interested in depositing their data with NAHDAP as well as secondary data users. And I've been with the NAHDAP project since 2020 and with ICPSR as a whole since 2016. We will also hear today from Dr. Amy Pienta, the NAHDAP director. Amy is a research scientist at ICPSR and leads ICPSR's Business and Collection Development Unit. At ICPSR, she oversees collection development and directs several large data archiving projects, including NAHDAP. She's also a research affiliate of the University of Michigan Center on the Demography of Aging and the Population Studies Center at the University of Michigan. Lately, Amy has been working on incentives to encourage scientists around open science and data sharing. Our third presenter today is Dr. Joy Jang. Joy is a research investigator and is the co-director of NAHDAP. Her research interests lie at the intersection of human development, family demography, health, and social contexts. As a trained interdisciplinary quantitative methodology and survey researcher, she uses secondary data for her research on substance use and health over the life course. Okay, so you know us now. It looks like we've got enough people responding to this poll that I can share the results so that we can get to know you. So I'm going to end it here, share the results with you. Okay, so the first question was, are you a current NIH grantee, a prospective NIH grantee, someone who helps out NIH grantees, or none of the above? So we actually have a lot of current NIH grantees here and people who help NIH grantees, so it's really great to have you here, and a few prospective grantees as well. I hope we'll share a lot of information today with you that'll help you with your NIH grant, especially if you have a prospective grant or an upcoming grant in the new year. And for the none of the above people who are here, I hope that we have some information that can help you share with your colleagues and help your colleagues to learn more about what we do. So the second question was around your experience archiving data. So we actually have a few people here who have archived at NAHDAP. That's excellent. Welcome back. And some people as well who've archived elsewhere within ICPSR. We're very happy to have you. And a bunch of people as well who are doing the right thing by sharing data also elsewhere at besides ICPSR and NAHDAP. So excellent. Welcome to you, and we're happy to have you here. So all the people who haven't archived data yet, I assume you have plans to do so in the future. So we're happy that you're here as well. I'm going to stop sharing those results now. Okay, so with that, we can get started. I'm going to start with just an overview of what we're talking about today. So 3 components of our presentation should be numbered 1, 2, 3, but they are not. Sorry about that. So first, we're going to talk about an overview of NAHDAP. Second, the new NIH policy and designating NAHDAP in your data management and sharing plan. And third, we're going to talk about some other ICPSR options for data sharing besides NAHDAP, some FAQs, and some additional resources around data sharing. Before we get into all of that, we wanted to share some terminology that we're going to use today so that we're all on the same page about what these terms mean or how we're referring to them. So first of all, metadata is data that provides information about data. It conveys information necessary to ensure data are discoverable, accessible, and usable. Curation refers to organizing, describing, cleaning, enhancing, and preserving data to make the data accessible to the public now and in the future. Data files are original quantitative or qualitative data, but also perhaps other data types as well. We also refer to, we use this term to sort of refer to data as well as the documentation that describe the data. So codebooks, questionnaires, and analytic notes. You may notice us using that term across the board pretty interchangeably for those materials. A repository is infrastructure that collects, manages, stores data for analysis, sharing, and reporting. NAHDAP is a repository. And then this is the last page of terminology, data confidentiality, protection of data from unauthorized access and disclosure. Disclosure risk is the degree of risk that a data record from a study could be linked to a specific person or organization, thereby revealing information that otherwise would not be known or known with as much certainty. And data management is the work that you do to prepare data to be used. So the NIH definition is the process of validating, organizing, protecting, maintaining, and processing scientific data to ensure the accessibility, reliability, and quality of the data for its users. All right, so I think we're on the same page about terminology. I'm going to go ahead and start with part one of today's webinar, an overview of NAHDAP. NAHDAP stands for the National Addiction and HIV Data Archive Program. We are a topical archive or data repository within the Inter-University Consortium of Political and Social Research, or ICPSR, at the University of Michigan. You may have heard of ICPSR in the past. NAHDAP is one of the groups that is within ICPSR. ICPSR is an international consortium of more than 750 academic institutions and research organizations, which provides leadership and training in data access, curation, and methods of analysis for social science research broadly. ICPSR hosts a social science data archive, which consists of over 20 specialized collections, one of which is NAHDAP, which is our substance use addiction and HIV archive. Other ICPSR collections focus on other topics such as education, aging, demography, criminal justice, and others. And NAHDAP has been funded by contract with the National Institute on Drug Abuse, or NIDA, since fall 2009. NAHDAP archives data related to drug and alcohol use, tobacco use, and HIV topics. And many of our most well-known data collections focus on youth environments or attitudes or behaviors and developmental outcomes. We do accept data across the lifespan, but we just have quite a lot of well-known youth data collections. NAHDAP shares infrastructure and staff with ICPSR. So throughout today's presentation, you might hear us refer to NAHDAP and ICPSR sort of interchangeably. In general, the services that are offered by one are offered by the other, and they're shared. So just keep that in mind as you're listening to us today. NAHDAP's mission is to facilitate research on drug addiction and HIV infection by acquiring, enhancing, preserving, and sharing data. And we work to make data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable in the substance use addiction and HIV research communities. NAHDAP offers a variety of services to both data users and researchers who are sharing data or preparing data for archiving, including everything listed here. So data archiving services and long-term data preservation, data curation, metadata standardization, and persistent identifiers for data collections, appropriate handling of sensitive data, and options for restricted data management and access, consulting services for researchers, including guidance on data preparation, data management and sharing plans, consent language, budgeting, letters of support, and others. We provide usage statistics for data depositors, and also education and training opportunities for researchers. At the time of this presentation, you can find about 570 studies or collections of data available on the NAHDAP website, about 230 of which include some amount of restricted use data, most of which, though, are available for public immediate download. And the studies include over 1 million variables and over 26,000 data-related publications. Of the studies you'll find on the NAHDAP site, the most common subject terms that are tagged are drug use, demographic characteristics, tobacco use, alcohol, and youth. The NAHDAP collection includes NIDA-funded studies, but also studies that are funded by other organizations and institutes. studies including substance use components of all varieties, studies on HIV-related topics, epidemiological and observational studies, studies focused on prevention, and data from all ages and across the lifespan. NAHDAP also accepts many types of data, including quantitative, qualitative, geospatial, video, and image data. So we have a very broad catalog of data that's available on the NAHDAP site and a broad range of data that we accept. NAHDAP has data that are both public use and restricted use. Public use data generally contain no identifiers and pose a minimal disclosure risk. They are immediately downloadable from the NAHDAP website as long as you have a free My Data account with ICPSR and agree to the ICPSR terms of use. Restricted use data generally contain indirect identifiers, which can pose a disclosure risk. In the cases of these data, the documentation files, such as codebooks and user guides, if they're available, are immediately downloadable in most cases, but you would need to apply for access to the restricted use data files. And this application process includes getting IRB approval or exemption for the proposed research project, signing a restricted data use agreement, and other requirements. In most cases, data are free to use. There are some exceptions for restricted use data, but these are in the minority of cases. So to elaborate on this a bit, there's generally no cost to access data at NAHDAP because that NAHDAP manages and provides ourselves because we are supported by a federal contract. But we also do cross-list data from other archives within ICPSR that may have fees associated. So for example, ICPSR's general archive, not one of those topical archives that I was talking about, but the general archive follows a membership model whereby users who are at ICPSR member institutions will not have fees to access data, but if there is somebody who wants to access data who is not from one of those institutions, they may have a fee to access that data. That is for data that is managed by the ICPSR General Archive. Data that NAHDAP manage and release with our own resources do not follow this membership fee structure. But as I said, we may list some that do on our website. So you may see that come up from time to time. For restricted use data, there are occasionally fees to access our virtual data enclave where some of our restricted data are made available. However, this is the case in only a couple of studies of the hundreds that we manage, so it's very rare to see that. We track the usage and reach of our website and our data, and researchers who deposit data with us will have the benefit of being able to track usage of their data files directly on the NAHDAP website. To get an idea of the volume of users we typically have, we've added some data here. So within a one-year period, from November 21 to October 22, we saw over 34,000 visitors to the NAHDAP website and over 29,000 unique users downloading data or documentation files from NAHDAP-owned studies. Traffic to NAHDAP studies and data is actually even higher than these numbers because NAHDAP studies are also listed on the ICPSR website, which is more well-known and gets higher traffic. So NAHDAP has a number of priorities or goals related to the types of data that we'd like to ingest. We are interested in working with researchers to acquire data related to addiction and substance use, first and foremost. Other high priority characteristics include, but are not limited to the following. We have an interest in longitudinal or repeated cross-sectional designs. This doesn't mean that we would not consider other study designs. We're also interested in building our collection of data on minority or underrepresented populations. And other things that we look for include studies that use some form of random selection, intervention studies, social science stimulus or executive function studies, large-scale studies, and studies with information on risky sexual behavior. So even if you're not sure if your data would fit within NAHDAP's parameters, we are always happy to discuss the possibility of including your data in NAHDAP. Even if we determine after talking to you that it doesn't fit with NAHDAP, we will work to find the right place for it at ICPSR. We encourage you to contact us and tell us about your data, especially if you're considering archiving with us. It helps to start those conversations sooner. And I also wanted to share what types of education and training opportunities that we provide. So we have a number of educational resources available to support data users. You can find on the training and support page of our website Materials and recordings from past workshops, presentations, and conferences, as well as a number of other resources, including data-driven learning guides and links to external learning resources. And NAHDAP also typically holds at least one workshop in the ICPSR summer program each year, often highlighting highly used data collections and giving researchers a platform and infrastructure to teach others about their data. Finally, we also do a lot in the realm of technical assistance and support for current or prospective data depositors. So this can include webinars and workshops focused on data sharing, such as this one, and one-on-one consultation around the topics of informed consent language, preparing data for archiving, data management and planning, including help with the NIH data management plan requirement, and budgeting for data archiving. We also support researchers with technical assistance throughout the data sharing process. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Amy, Dr. Pienta, to present this next section. Amy?
Thank you so much, Chelsea. That was a fantastic start. I'm going to turn now to talking about the new, a little bit more about the new NIH data management and sharing policy and how to designate ICPSR in a data management and sharing plan that you might be putting together as an investigator. So it was really good to see at the beginning all of the folks who both have experience as NIH investigators and also planning to continue to submit or submit new in the future. So welcome, and hopefully this information is helpful for you when putting together that plan. So as you can imagine, NAHDAP and some of the other NIH repositories at ICPSR, because NAHDAP is not the only NIH-funded repository at ICPSR, we have been planning how our projects can be used to help NIH investigators meet the new NIH data management and sharing policy. So at NAHDAP, we've been putting together information about how to designate NAHDAP in your plan. And I should mention that much of what you'll hear in this presentation applies to designating ICPSR as well. So beginning January 25th, 2023, I'm sure most of you will know this date, and that's why you're here. NIH will begin to require all investigators submit a data management and sharing plan with their grant applications. The goal of this new policy is to maximize data sharing by NIH investigators when it's appropriate to share the data that are being proposed to be collected. And effectively, the expectation is that most NIH-funded data will be shared that's collected on and after that date. Exceptions to sharing are expected to be rare, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in FAQs at the end. But even when data cannot be shared, all of it will be managed, meaning that all investigators who propose to collect data will prepare this plan, and if funded, will be expected to follow their data management and sharing plan. Next slide, please. So NIH has been very helpful in helping investigators navigate the landscape of repositories that exist so that investigators can find places where their data might fit. And as investigators evaluate repository options, NIH has defined characteristics of desirable repositories that help investigators select the best repository for their data that meets the spirit of what this policy is all about, because there's a lot of variation. Investigators are directed to domain repositories over generalist repositories where there is one. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, ICPSR and by extension the NAHDAP archive are both domain repositories, meaning that we have an emphasis on substantive and methodological and data types for the social, behavioral, and related health sciences. And as a domain repository, we also are meeting all of the desired characteristics that NIH describes on their website. And so this is a long list of what those are. And we also have extensive experience managing and sharing human subject data, which again may be another reason that you've come to hear this presentation today, is that you're concerned about data confidentiality, and that is part of the core of what ICPSR and NAHDAP is good at doing. So I'm going to talk about how NAHDAP meets the 5 areas that were highlighted on that list, and invite you to follow up if you have more questions. So the first characteristic of a repository that helps you know that you're putting your data into a solid place is unique persistent identifiers. That is a way that references your data permanently over time, that's managed by the organization who assigns this identifier, sort of here and now and forevermore. So ICPSR assigns persistent identifiers called DOIs, so digital object identifiers. This DOI is part of the recommended data citation that we provide with any user of data that comes to our website and accesses data for their use, so they know how to cite it appropriately. And when that data citation or DOI is used in subsequent publications, the DOI will take anybody who clicks on that link right back to the study homepage where the data live. Next slide, please. Another aspect of a desirable repository is that it has long-term sustainability. And so you heard Chelsea say that NAHDAP itself is 13 years old, but ICPSR as an organization is just turned 60 years old. We've been a repository preserving data for a very long time. The earliest studies that came to ICPSR 60 years ago are still available today. They've withstood the test of time and format migrations and media migrations, and we continue to make those available as we would data coming in today into the future. The particular certification that ICPSR and NAHDAP effectively have is called the Core Trust Seal certification. And that's one designation that you can look at when selecting a repository to know that the organization has policies and practices that are likely to stand the test of time. Next slide, please. The next characteristic of NAHDAP and ICPSR is that we provide tools and guidance to researchers who are depositing their data, where they begin the process of making sure that data are usable as they submit them to the archive, and filling out lots of descriptive information about the study's methodology, and uploading all sorts of documentation and data that helps us have a complete record of the study. That information is used by our 50+ expert data curators at ICPSR, that many of those who work for the NAHDAP project, who review, organize, and fully document the data using tools and processes that we have to make their jobs easier, but then effectively creates highly usable data as the product on the other side that we're able to release through the NAHDAP website. Data curators are also following a quality assurance process to ensure that the data are of the highest quality standard as efficiently as we can. Next slide. So ICPSR itself is, as an organization, committed to providing broad, equitable, and maximally open access to data. And you heard a little bit about the free versus the member options from Chelsea at the beginning of the presentation. NIH investigators who deposit data to NAHDAP have the possibility of their data being supported by NAHDAP and then free to all users when they are released. It's also possible to for an NIH grantee to submit their data to ICPSR, where the data would be free to members and others would pay a small charge. In either instance, though, there's always the option of direct budgeting for those costs that are incurred when we are improving and curating the data to be added to the repository. And so it's possible to direct budget those into your NIH proposal to ensure that the data remain free to users, whether they're part of the NAHDAP archive or not. But we'll talk a little bit more about this in the last part of the presentation. Next slide. The other thing, the final area from that repository list that I wanted to talk about is confidentiality, because it's something that is very robust at NAHDAP. As you can imagine, addiction data is treated carefully. It's often sensitive. There's also often a lot of detailed information that poses some disclosure risk when indirect characteristics of the people in our studies are described from variable to variable to variable in a data set. You put them together and it gets narrow pretty quickly in terms of how many people might represent a set of characteristics. And so NAHDAP has been really a leading project at ICPSR, taking in restricted data sets that need special handling, ensuring that the management and any potential access to the data by data users is done ethically. ICPSR itself has a data stewardship policy committee. It has a data privacy and security officer who designs our policies and practices, who also has a security team, and a disclosure review board that all work together to set the myriad of policies and practices that are keeping data safe at ICPSR and on the NAHDAP project. ICPSR's data curators receive regular training and are supervised in how to conduct disclosure risk reviews, and all data that come into NAHDAP undergo a disclosure risk review process to ensure that we are either mitigating disclosure risk or managing it. And then finally, data curators are following established standards and guidelines to ensure that confidentiality is maintained. And we have lots of publications and things like that out there that describe and detail some of those processes if you're looking for more information. And finally, there is, as I said, the possibility when disclosure risk can't be fully mitigated to release data publicly from NAHDAP, a possibility of NAHDAP selecting a tier of managed access to the restricted data sets. And so we may require a data use agreement from any potential user for any of our restricted data sets. And then the data are available either via secure download, where they can be. The most sensitive data are available only in a virtual data enclave environment. And I'll mention that ICPSR NAHDAP's not currently using it. There also is a physical data enclave where people have to come on site to analyze the data. So all those are types of managed access at ICPSR that are designed to keep human subjects protections in place. Next slide, please. I mentioned briefly that there are ways to designate, when you are designating NAHDAP or ICPSR in a data management and sharing plan, to include the direct costs of our archiving services to ensure that the data are open and free to all users. And to do that, those costs can be built into your budget proposals. We can help with that, and there will be a link later in the presentation that you can follow to get help with preparing an estimate for the kinds of data that you're planning to collect. As well as it's possible, it's mentioned here, it's not as relevant to us, any local data management costs that you have can also be built into your budget when preparing a budget for a new application. Next slide. And then finally, if you have questions about what's allowable in this particular area, NIH has really good information about that. There's a QR code that you can follow when you get access to these slides or now, and find out more about the types of allowable costs. Things that aren't allowed are covering the cost of things like infrastructure, data collection, direct charges for things that otherwise should be in your IDC. But the kinds of service costs like ICPSR and NAHDAP use to provide curation services to improve and make available the data are allowable costs. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chelsea, who will talk about the data management and sharing plan elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, so in this next section, I'm going to talk more about the data management and sharing plan. Under the new policy, as we heard, researchers who plan to generate scientific data will be required to submit a data management and sharing plan to describe how the data will be managed and shared. The recommended length is 2 pages or less, and the plan must address the 6 elements that are listed here on the right-hand side of the slide. Quickly, I'd like to note that NIH plans to provide a fillable template of this plan, which should be available on the sharing.nih.gov website soon. And ICPSR also plans to prepare share guidance, I guess, on filling out the different sections of this plan with information on how ICPSR or any one of the topical archives, including NAHDAP, handles data given each of these 6 plan elements. So our goal with this section of the presentation is to provide information about NAHDAP within each of these plan elements that may help you prepare your data management plan if you're planning to share data with NAHDAP. So sort of a summary of what we do in each of these areas that you could potentially then use some of the language or some of the information in your own plan. Please note, though, that individual NIH institutes or centers may have additional guidance for preparing the data management plan. So it's really important that you should consult the particular RFA that you're responding to or the institute to which you're applying to see if there is additional guidance available from them. What I'm sharing is general information. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to start with element 1, data type. The information in the how to respond box here is drawn from the NIH data sharing website and also reflects NAHDAP's understanding of what NIH is generally looking for in each element. Again, some of the information might vary depending on the particular institute or center that you're working with. But in general, you will want to respond to the data type element with the following information: describing the types and amounts of data that will be generated, describing what will be shared or not shared given any ethical, legal, or technical limitations, and listing metadata and documentation that will be produced, such as codebooks and survey instruments. So given that, here's some information about NAHDAP that you might wish to include in your data management plan. So data types, first of all, NAHDAP accepts a wide range of data types, including quantitative, qualitative, geospatial, image, and video. You can refer to the ICPSR collection development policy for more information if you're not sure if the type of data that you're interested in sharing will be accepted. But generally, I can say it probably will. Sharing, NAHDAP manages access to confidential data elements through its restricted data dissemination practices, which Amy just mentioned. So if you have concerns about the confidentiality of your data, you can rest assured that NAHDAP has experience handling these data and has established processes for doing so. And then in terms of metadata and documentation, NAHDAP and when we release your data, we will make the codebooks and other study documentation and metadata available on the ICPSR and NAHDAP websites right alongside the data. So all of that will be available in one package. ICPSR and NAHDAP also produce codebooks for your files, which are tagged with our metadata process that we follow, the standards that we follow. So both of those will be available alongside your study. Okay, the next element is related tools, software, and/or code. And you will need to describe any tools or software that are required to access or manipulate the data. For the NAHDAP information, we release quantitative data files in multiple standard commonly accessed formats, including SPSS, SAS, Stata, R, ASCII, and delimited formats. And in addition, NAHDAP can publish your code for merging, linking, or other data manipulations, or we can also link to your code on another platform within the metadata that we create for your study. So we definitely encourage you to submit code when it would be helpful for secondary data users. Element 3 is standards, and this includes describing any applicable standards for organizing and accessing the data and metadata, such as formats, metadata standards, and so on. And I wanted to share that NAHDAP and ICPSR follow the Data Documentation Initiative, DDI, metadata standard for studies that it accepts. There is a link here on this slide that allows you to look into more information about the metadata standards that we follow and DDI in general. But in addition to using this DDI standard, we also use controlled vocabularies across the data that we release. And we also include standard metadata elements across all of the studies that we release, which allows for greater findability and accessibility of our studies. The next element is data preservation, access, and associated timelines. In this element, you will need to share details about the name of the repository where the data will be archived, how the data will be findable and identifiable, when the data will be made available, and for how long. And I guess I should note that NIH expects that the data are shared no later than the publication or the end of the award, if you have data underlying findings that are not published in the peer-reviewed journals, whichever comes first. So the NAHDAP information here. Regarding our repository, NAHDAP is one of NIH's designated repositories, and we permanently archive deposited files. Since I guess I should say that since this is permanent archiving, to pay for this archiving, you would just need to budget for upfront costs. So ICPSR and NAHDAP's model is that costs to ingest and curate data are accrued at the time that the data are shared. And there are no additional perpetual costs over time, although it is permanent archiving. So in the case of NAHDAP, either our contract with NIDA or ICPSR's membership funding model would cover long-term costs such as storage and things like that. Regarding the NAHDAP timeline, it's good to keep in mind that when you share the files with us, it doesn't mean that they will be have an immediate turnaround and be released immediately after we get them. So it will depend on a number of things, such as the size of the data, the quality and condition of the data, and also the number of data collections in the NAHDAP queue for processing. But we do our best to release things as soon as possible once we receive them. Just something to keep in mind. And regarding how data will be findable and accessible, all of the data that we release are provided via the NAHDAP and ICPSR websites. So researchers can use our robust website search tools to search for data or variables of interest. And this is thanks to the metadata that we create for each study and the standards that we use for our metadata. So that is how people will find these data. There is some more information on the standard here. So a couple of additional things. As Amy already mentioned, data released by NAHDAP receive a DOI. And also to enhance data findability, NAHDAP creates metadata records in DDI format, which can also include variable level metadata to further enhance findability, allowing people to search for variables of interest in addition to data of interest or studies of interest. The fifth plan element is access, distribution, or reuse considerations. And in this case, you will need to describe the informed consent, privacy, and confidentiality protections, laws or regulations, and any other considerations that may limit the extent of data sharing. And you also need to state any plan to communicate this limitation to organizations that will preserve and share the scientific data. A lot of the information that I have listed here is very similar to things that Amy recently just talked about. So for example, our data curation staff conduct a disclosure risk review of all data. And this really helps us to understand what the appropriate restrictions are to place upon access to a particular data collection. So this is something to keep in mind if you're concerned about the confidentiality of your data. We do have these processes in place for handling that. We make data available via both public use files as well as restricted use files where it's appropriate. And these restricted use files would require an application to access, including a signed restricted data use agreement. NAHDAP also offers tiers of access to restricted data, as Amy already mentioned. And if data are made available via our virtual data enclave, there are additional controls on access, including the inability to move files outside of the secure server and a requirement for all research outputs to be reviewed by NAHDAP staff prior to use outside of the virtual data enclave. So we have restrictions in place on access for the most sensitive data. The same plan element also includes additional considerations for addressing human subjects protections, which are listed here. And I just wanted to point you to ICPSR's guidance on informed consent language. The link is here on the slide, and you will find helpful information here on writing your informed consent language related to data sharing in a way that is transparent to study participants. All right, I think we're finally on that last plan element, which is oversight of data management and sharing. In this element, you will need to describe how compliance with the data management and sharing plan will be monitored and managed, the frequency of oversight, and by whom at your institution. And so NAHDAP's recommendation on this is to identify an individual or individuals on the research team who will be primarily responsible for ensuring appropriate data management and sharing protocols and practices are met. And how this normally works, the people that we interact with at NAHDAP about data management and sharing are generally the PIs and their institutions that enter into a deposit agreement with us. Some larger projects also have data managers who share in this responsibility. And some people with larger projects also have data coordinating centers, which may also share in this responsibility. Just some ideas about how that could work for your project. Okay, with that, I am going to turn it over to Joy to present on the next section.
Thank you, Chelsea. In part 3, I will cover other ICPSR options and services at ICPSR for data sharing, and also we'll have FAQs and share additional resources. Next slide, please. At ICPSR, there are other NIH repositories that you can designate to share your data. NIH institutes or centers sponsor specific topical repositories. Data sharing for demographic research, DSDR, is NICHD-funded repository whose data topics covers maternal and child health and the life course and population health. NAHDA, National Archive of Computerization Data on Aging, is the Aging Data Archive funded by NIA. If a topical archive cannot accept your data, you can still deposit your data into general archive. NIH-funded data will be made available at no cost to those at ICPSR membership organizations and others for a small charge. Next slide, please. Other ICPSR services include Open ICPSR. Open ICPSR is a self-publishing repository with immediate publication by adding persistent identifier. Open ICPSR accepts data up to 30 gigabytes, but ICPSR or NAHDAP does not improve or change the dataset. The data will be preserved as is and distributed in the same condition and format submitted by the depositor. Therefore, the depositors and researchers are entirely responsible for data confidentiality and protection of data privacy. The other services include linkage library. This is a space where you can share programming codes and combine data sets to compare different algorithms. Linkage library is to promote transparency and applicability of the research. Next slide, please. Finally, REES, the Registry of Efficacy and Effectiveness of Studies, is a database for causal inference studies in education and related fields. REES accommodates a range of study designs, including randomized trial or experimental design or single case designs. This database is searchable and exportable. Next slide, please. You may have question now, well, why do I need to use and why do I need to consider another ICPSR option? First question would be whether your data is about substance use or drug use or HIV-related study. If not, you may consider other ICPSR options. But if the content area matches with NAHDAP, then we'll talk with NIDA, who will approve to use NAHDAP contract. Then your data will be processed with NAHDAP funds. If not, you may consider other ICPSR options. Please check the ICPSR collection developmental policy to see your data meet the scope of ICPSR acquisition. Next slide, please. And now moving to FAQs. First, some of you may be familiar with the timeline, but what is the timeline for sharing my data? As Chelsea mentioned, NIH expects that data are shared no later than publication or the end of the award. NAHDAP recommends you get in touch with us early in your project. we would like to emphasize two important touch points. First, when you are writing your proposal, you may want to touch base with us to discuss costs related to archiving and other services. Second point is when you are awarded, it's good to let us know with your estimated timeline. Otherwise, we are not tracking your timeline. Also, when you are awarded, we can provide current expectations around how quick data may be released. Next slide. Are there any exemptions for data sharing? According to the NIDA, NIH does not anticipate all data to be shared, but researchers should provide the reasoning for data for their decision. Next slide. The NIH website actually provides information about some reasons and not justifiable reasons. Not justifiable reasons include, for example, because the data is too small, or it would not be widely used, or to have no suitable repositories. Please check the NIH data sharing website. Next slide. Another important question is how researchers know NAHDA will accept the data. Well, NAHDA accepts a wide range of data relevant to substance use topics. You can find information on our website. Please note that the list on our website is not exhaustive, and please contact us if you're not sure about it. Next slide. Yeah, and we are very closely working with other ICPSR repositories, so we'll help you find the right home for your data if it's not NAHDA. Next slide, please. Finally, how do I estimate my data sharing budget? NIH listed information about allowable costs, as Amy mentioned, and you may have some not allowable costs. NAHDA is available to help you determine the cost associated with data curation and preservation. The cost estimate would take about 10 business days for us. So please keep it in mind and contact us as early as possible. Next slide. ICPSR recently created a web page specifically focusing on sharing NIH data under the new policy. Please check the homepage. And we also recommend you check with our recent webinars. Again, the slide will be shared after the webinar. Finally, please request help for budget estimation or data management plans. You can schedule a 30-minute consultation with us, and please include NAHDA in your request email title. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Joy. We have some questions in the Q&A, and if you still have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box now. I am going to start here with the first one. So how do we archive data in a changing governance and policy? I wonder if Amy or Joy have thoughts about that, and we can always come back to it if you need some time to think about it.
Exactly sure what this question is asking. Data governance has been fairly stable at NAHDAP, where as an archive, we always ask for an agreement either from the individual or the institution for restricted data for the rights to accept a copy of any data set and make sure that any obligations that have been promised in the informed consent or whatever are communicated to us through that process. And so that's a part of what NAHDAP has done since its beginning. And so there may be reasons in the future that those kinds of things are changing, but we would definitely provide heads up on when that is happening to our audiences and communities.
Thank you. The next question, it looks like, is also for Amy. So what are the policies for data retention? Any sunsetting policies?
That's a great question. So I mentioned that the first study that came to ICPSR, study 1, is, or the early studies are still available. In general, we do retain data in perpetuity at ICPSR. On the NAHDAP project, that is also true. Because we are a contractor in the work we do through NAHDAP with NIDA, it is possible that NIDA may choose to move a copy of the archive elsewhere, as it would with any contractual relationship that it has. So a copy of the data is owned by NIDA itself, and it has the rights to move that data elsewhere. The preservation part of what we would do at ICPSR would be to keep a copy of the data as well where that was possible, so long as it wasn't in conflict with any of the agreements that had been signed with depositors who gave us the data.
Thank you. The next question I will answer. So what is the turnaround time for an investigator to gain access to restricted NAHDAP data, given the use of a data access committee and review of the research proposal? So once someone submits their application to us for access to restricted data, the average time frame is about 2 to 4 weeks until they get access to the data. And the reason it can vary so much is because it really depends on if they need to make a bunch of changes to their application, assuming their research project sounds sound and not like it's going to introduce any issues of confidentiality. So I guess I should say we don't review in terms of scientific quality of the research question, but we would review in terms of whether the proposal can actually be done with the data, as well as whether there are any red flags in terms of confidentiality. So it usually takes about 2 to 4 weeks from the time of submission to the time they get access. There is additional work that goes into applying that is done before that time, like getting IRB approval or exemption, that puts an additional time to a person's application. Okay, I'm going
also, to Chelsea, there's an institutional signature that the user has to get. And so when the institution of the user is asked to sign the agreement, they may introduce some kind of a proposed language change or something that's to be consistent with their practices that would then have the lawyers of the two institutions going back and forth until there was agreement on that language. So I'd say that that's probably one of the other major drivers of time. Otherwise, the process could be days.
Exactly. Yep, that's true. It depends a lot on the particular institution that a researcher is coming from. If qualitative data collection has already begun and participants have been consented, is there a way to deposit the data at ICPSR, or is this usually something that needs to be undertaken prior to study start? I think Amy probably knows the most about this.
Yeah, so ICPSR has hundreds of qualitative or mixed method collections. Many of our quantitative data sets have open-ended questions that are qualitative. And so in general, we don't have a different standard for accepting qualitative data. We do it readily. Perhaps though that this question asker is asking a little bit about if the informed consent said, I will not share the data or something like that, that would pose a bigger issue. And then it would be a matter of making sure that the institution where the data were collected was in agreement that the repository could get a copy of the data, perhaps de-identified. NAHDAP would, as it always does, review the de-identification that was done to the data before it arrived to be sure that we were in agreement that it was de-identified to the plan that we had for release, either as a public use or a restricted data set. In the case of qualitative data, it is true that often we would not want to remove all of the indirect identifiers, the context that's so rich in qualitative data. So many of our qualitative studies, purely qualitative studies, text studies, do end up as restricted use studies in our system so that we can further protect the data and make sure that any users of the data do it ethically, and that then we vet the output if it's in the virtual data enclave, for example, where a user has produced results and they can then only take out of the virtual data enclave anything that meets the highest standard for being de-identified. So in that way, we keep the data, qualitative data locked down, and hopefully can still service that as well. I will mention finally that we have an HGRI funded project to demonstrate our capabilities to archive de-identified NIH broadly defined qualitative studies, and we have over 20 NIH funded qualitative collections that we have made available through that project. And that's given us a lot of confidence and experience to know that we can do this at scale, especially as the new data management and sharing policy takes hold.
Excellent, thank you. I know we are 1 minute away. I kind of want to pick one additional question. So one that I think is an important one to answer. I'm not sure if we know the answer yet, but if our proposal aligns with NAHDAP, can we simply list NAHDAP as our repository in the data management and sharing plan, or do we have to confirm this with NAHDAP that you will accept our data in advance? What do you think, Amy?
That's a great question. It's always better to get in touch with us. It's not the case that we're going to be able to sort of pre-approve every study. It's, you know, at the proposal stage, a lot of studies are not very clear on what they will collect and the priorities of what's going to happen 3 or 4 years down the line when you want to deposit the data is really up in the air. But we can give you an indication of the fit of the data, and we can indicate that we would entertain the data, if not at NAHDAP, at ICPSR for sure. If there's direct budget, that means that NAHDAP doesn't have to expend contract resources to take that data. And so that's, I think, a really good idea to consider as well, to budget for that curation work that is the costly part of making data available. And then the data are sure to be open and free to everyone from ICPSR and perhaps NAHDAP.
Great, thank you so much. I'm trying to answer some other questions in the Q&A. If we did not get to your question today, please do feel free to email it to us. Our email address is here on the slide, icpsr-help@umich.edu. And please just say in your email that you're wanting a response from NAHDAP. We will send the slides and the recording after this webinar. And we will also, in the future, someone brought up a good question. We are putting together a template sort of data management and sharing plan with information about ICPSR and NAHDAP that you can add to your plan. And we will go ahead and send that to the registrant list of this webinar once that's available. It's probably still a few weeks away, but we will get that once we have it. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to Amy and Joy and for presenting today. And thank you all for coming. And we look forward to talking to you soon.